the modern fabrication of ancient Kemet, aka Egypt. The cosplaying world of Egyptomania is pervasive and expansive in Western academia, in online spaces, and in the mainstream media. And it appears to be growing with no end in sight. But when the truth emerges out of the shadows of Western bias and bigotry, the real history of Africa begins to unfold, and the true origins of civilization are made clear. Then the true history of the global black world unfolds. Who were the ancient Egyptians? Fire fact number 1. The ancient Egyptians were a multicultural nation of diversely phenotypic indigenous black Africans, Negroes. According to reliable sources from ancient eyewitness accounts to early 17th and 18th century historians, the ancient Egyptians were an indigenous black African civilization whose origins are rooted in the southern African interior, where the Nile River flows in from the south of Egypt and Nubia, out of the source waters of Lake Victoria. Egypt received all of the cultural elements for its sciences, architecture, writing, and mathematics from the southern African kingdoms such as Kustal, where pharaonic culture was established at least 200 years before the existence of the Egyptian city-state. The very first pharaoh to settle and establish order in the Northlands was King Nama. With him came pyramid building and of the cultural elements that established ancient Egypt as the civilization we know of today. The actual name of this civilization was Kemet, which meant the Black Land, and its people called themselves Kemetu, which translates to the black people. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus wrote that the Egyptians had black skin and kinky hair, and expressed that the people were of the same indigenous stock as all other indigenous Africans to the south of them. The Bible connects the origin of Egypt to its ancestor, Noah's youngest son Ham. Egypt was none other than Ham's son Mizraim, who was the brother of Cush, Ham's other son. The name Ham translates to the word Kemet, which was, as stated previously, the proper name of the Egyptian state. The name Egypt came into use with the Greeks after the dynastic period. The name Ham became synonymous with the word black in ancient times. The Bible refers to Egypt as the land of Ham. Ham's son Cush was the progenitor of a cultural empire that apparently stretched from North Africa, across the Arabian Peninsula, and deep into the area of Western Asia. In those regions, Cush established the first high civilizations in Babylon, Assyria, and Mesopotamia. Cush came to be known as Ethiopia by the Greeks. The name Ethiopia means blackface. Notably, the founders of Sumerian referred to themselves as the Blackheads, seeming to further attest to accounts indicating their Black Hamitic Kushite origins. Opponents of ancient Egypt's indigenous black cultural foundations like to point to the Levant as a probable source for Egyptian origins, and that the people who first colonized and brought civilization into the Nile Valley were Natufians. But they never seem cognizant of the fact that anthropological science has shown that the Natufians were of sub-Saharan black African phenotype. Either they are not aware of this fact, or they prefer to remain in a comfort zone that allows them to maintain the sense that anything coming into North Africa, ancient Egypt specifically, real or imagined, can and should be considered Caucasian regardless of the facts established by the reliable historical record, as well as the science of anthropology and unbiased results from authentic genetic testing. The reasoning behind all of their unfounded narratives is clear, that is, to convince us that the origins of the ancient Egyptian lie in Europe and Western Asia. What is even more clear is that this is a completely false modern fabrication. Fire fact number 2, slave trade era politics. Since the discovery of the ancient Egyptian civilization, the shock inflicted upon the psyche of the Western mind surrounding the initial results of the findings has forced them into an intellectual frenzy to push forth and maintain their staunch stance that has recast the black race, in whatever form or variation it presents itself, as an inferior one. From that time on, The West has worked diligently to systematically negatively stigmatize, marginalize, and morally castigate the black race as a whole in the minds of the global society. They've set out to undermine the historical reputation of black people with a most peculiar brand of fury. Fire fact number 3. If you look at the way in which European-centered artists like to depict ancient Egyptians, they rarely, if ever, do so from an accurate real-world perspective. They must always tell themselves they're being objective, but the outcome of their work shows that they are influenced by anything but objectivity. When viewing their depictions with a critical eye, you can see a totally different picture unveiled than what is actually presented to us in history. Look at the way the Egyptian soldiers are depicted in this Western cosplay rendering. The characters are generic and show no distinct racial phenotype, but what is clear is that they are decidedly not indigenous black African. Now look at the way the ancient Egyptian artist depicted the entire Egyptian infantry in this impressively detailed group of wooden artifacts. The first thing you noticed is that they're not the same generic phenotype as the ones depicted in the Western artist's rendition. Notice that they are clearly depicted with all the features of your phenotypical black African. The Egyptian artist clearly depicted native black African individuals, while the soldiers depicted by the Western artist are clearly not intended to represent black individuals. This is an example of the randomized depiction of ancient Egyptians on display, allowing one to perceive and recast the ancient Egyptians as any random race they choose. They defiantly use generic Caucasian and Arab-looking faces in their contrived imagery in order to replace the Negroid faces we know represent the real-life pharaohs and queens. Another very important feature present in the Western artist's depiction, which is quite common in virtually everything they produce, that is, the royal pharaonic Nemes headdress. European-centered seem compelled to project a subconscious Eurocentric system of rank onto their perception of the ancient Egyptians. A system that is clearly not present in the authentic depictions of the ancient Egyptian artists. In reality, no one but the pharaoh could don the royal Nemes. This is a clear expression of their inability to competently infiltrate and understand the intricacies of the Africanness of ancient Egyptian culture. The YouTube creator, The King's Monologue, has an excellent video on the subject of Egyptian royal crowns. Fire fact 4. While the mainstream media and Western academia appear random and unbiased in their thesis and surface presentations on ancient Egypt, they are deliberate and exclusive in their unspoken marginalization of the black people who were the real population and indigenous builders of ancient Egypt. Their actual agenda is keen and direct. They are very careful and deliberate in what they choose to show us in regard to race and phenotype when it comes to their visual depictions and recreations of the pharaohs and the overall Egyptian population. In this, they are aggressively hostile and vehemently deceptive. They are no friend the black race. Neither do they regard companionship with truth to be of moral importance. Any form of objectivity is highly focused and pretentious, with their main goal being theft. The heisting of what they are honed to believe is of utmost value. That would be the confiscation of classic historical primacy and godlike ownership of the globe, with all of its intellectual properties and precious resources, including human chattel. 4. Any time you take from a people and seek to limit or disrupt their public discourse, your intention is to bar them from mainstream interests, while giving yourself permission to exercise mastery over them and punish them whenever they step outside of the lines you aim to routinely draw for them. Fire fact number 5. By the time Egyptians built the pyramids, therefore no mass migrations from Europe down to the south into Western Asia or Northern Africa. There was no Caucasian emergence from the steppes of the Caucasus Mountains during any high cultural development of Egypt and Nubia, or in the Cushitic empires of Africa and Western Asia. The Indo-Europeans had not yet made their indelible mark on the regions of Southern Europe, Western Asian, and the Indian subcontinent. Since the discovery of ancient Egyptian artifacts that prove that black people made up the cultural and ethnic base of Egyptian society, There has been no end to the efforts to debunk the reality that the ancient Egyptians were indeed black Africans. While it can be asserted with a good degree of accuracy that the ancient Egyptians were a multicultural nation, it is demonstrably incorrect to state that they were a multiracial culture. To state that geographic proximity to the Mediterranean demands that it should be seen as an open and free hub for all races except black Africans borders on the insane. Historical documentation and anthropological research has shown that the ancient Egyptians were indeed black people. They were not white, they were not Arabs, and they were not modern Egyptian. But their attempts to circumvent documented history, much less universal reality, is bold and unrelenting, but ultimately futile. It can be observed in virtual every Negro population. There can be a vast range of diversity. No other race comes close to displaying the level of diversity common among black indigenous populations, from lip size to nose shapes and lengths, to thin lips and full lips. Africa has the tallest groups in the world and smallest groups in the world, plus a wide range of skin tones, including occasionally pink with blonde hair. Western academics, through the mainstream media, would have false images and false memories of a white or Arabized version of ancient Egypt imprinted on our minds. But all who have their heads on straight will reject such ahistorical notions. In conclusion, I want to reiterate the proven fact that ancient Egypt, aka Kemet, was not a Eurasian-inspired culture, nor was it a Mediterranean civilization, as some have wrongly suggested. Ancient Egypt was an indigenous black African civilization comprised of multiple local cultures. Its culture was purely a derivative of continental Inner Africa. Respect is essentially a given in virtually any instance of initiated experience between civil human beings, and it must be earned only after it has been lost. As civil persons who require respect from others, we are obliged to respect strangers with whom we have no qualifying level of experience. Mainstream media, as well as much of Western academia, have effectively lost its right to demand respect from those who both continue to marginalize and devalue with the help of various offices of government. Please enjoy these images, make comparisons to the actual artifacts, then compare them to the cosplaying Caucasian characters and tell me what you think.